He remembers the exact moment he realized something was wrong. Not when she got into the car, not when she gave him the address, not even when she thanked him for the ride. It was when the radio suddenly turned off, and his own name was spoken from the back seat. Some stories refuse to stay buried. They surface years later, unchanged, waiting for someone else to experience them again. This is not a story about a reckless decision. It's about a simple act of kindness, a ride home on a quiet night, and the moment when reality slowly unravels. Because sometimes the most terrifying encounters don't announce themselves. They sit beside you, they speak calmly, and they leave behind proof no one was ever meant to find. Robert was certain that nothing about that night should have stayed with him. Days passed, then weeks, and he forced himself into a routine designed to erase it. He worked longer hours. He avoided the bar entirely. He convinced himself that memory could be reshaped by repetition, that if he replayed the night often enough, it would lose its sharpness and become just another distorted recollection. But the opposite happened. Each time he remembered it, new details surfaced, sharper and more intrusive than before. He began noticing patterns, not supernatural ones at first, mundane ones. Every time it rained, his thoughts drifted back to the car. The smell of damp fabric, the faint sound of her breathing, the way the streetlights reflected off her coat, making it appear almost translucent. He started paying attention to strangers who resembled her, women standing alone at bus stops, figures waiting under flickering lamps. Each time, his stomach tightened before he could stop himself. Sleep became fragmented. He would wake up convinced someone had spoken his name, only to find the apartment silent. His phone showed no missed calls, no notifications. Still, he kept it face down at night, as if avoiding eye contact with something unseen. One evening, curiosity overcame fear. He searched local archives online, typing her name into databases and forums. What he found unsettled him further. There were mentions of her accident scattered across old message boards, short posts, fragmented memories. Several users claimed to have seen her after her death, always near roads, always asking for help. The posts ended abruptly, accounts abandoned shortly after. Robert tried to contact one of the users. The message bounced back, undelivered. The calls returned soon after. They never rang more than once, just enough to register, just enough to leave behind a time stamp. Always 11:11. He stopped answering entirely, letting them fade into silence. But silence, he learned, could be just as invasive. The longer he ignored the calls, the more intrusive his thoughts became. He started hearing faint static when the room was quiet. He swore the radio in his kitchen clicked on by itself just for a second, before shutting down again. He told no one. Explaining it out loud made it feel less real, almost ridiculous. Instead, he drove long, aimless routes through the city, as if distance itself could dilute memory. That was when he noticed the car behind him one night. It followed at a consistent distance, headlights dimmed, never overtaking. When he slowed, it slowed. When he turned, it turned. At a red light, he checked the mirror. The back seat was empty, but the reflection lingered longer than it should have, distorting slightly before returning to normal. The car behind him disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. Weeks later, Robert received a letter. No return address. The envelope was damp, the paper inside warped as if exposed to rain. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, monochrome, a roadside, a familiar curve. His car parked beside the cemetery gates. The photo was dated the night he gave her a ride. panic set in. He called the local police station, trying to explain without sounding unhinged. They listened politely, promised to look into it. No follow-up ever came. When he pressed them days later, they claimed no record of his call existed. That was when he understood that whatever he had encountered was no longer confined to memory. The radio incident happened next. Driving home late, exhausted, the dashboard lights flickered. The radio turned on by itself, cycling through stations before settling on static. Beneath the noise, a voice began to emerge. Not clear, not fully formed, but familiar. He gripped the steering wheel, heart racing, refusing to turn around. The voice never finished its sentence. He pulled over and vomited on the side of the road, shaking violently. When he looked back into the car, the back seat was still empty. But the seatbelt was buckled. Robert stopped driving after that. Life narrowed. He avoided nights, avoided rain, avoided anything that reminded him of movement or travel. But avoidance didn't bring relief. It brought anticipation. Each day felt like a pause before something inevitable. The cemetery resurfaced in his dreams. Always the same angle, always the same grave. Sometimes in the dream, he stood beside it. Other times, he watched from the road, helpless to intervene. He always woke before seeing her face clearly. One morning he found mud on his shoes. He lived alone. The apartment door was locked, the windows sealed. The mud smelled like wet earth and iron. He washed his shoes repeatedly, scrubbing until his hands hurt. The stains faded, but the smell lingered. Robert realized then that distance meant nothing. Time meant nothing. Whatever had followed him was no longer tied to a place. He returned to the cemetery in daylight, driven by a need to confront what he had avoided. The caretaker recognized him instantly, said he wasn't the first, said people came back sometimes, asking questions they already knew the answers to. When Robert asked why, the caretaker hesitated. Because, he said, some people don't finish things. Robert stood before the grave, staring at the stone until his vision blurred. He whispered an apology he didn't fully understand. The air felt heavier, pressing against his chest. For a moment he thought it was over. That night the phone rang again. This time he answered. There was no static, no breathing, just silence. And then a single sentence spoken clearly, calmly, in her voice. You stopped too soon. The line went dead. Robert disconnected the phone, removed the battery, and threw it away. He packed a bag and left the city before sunrise, driving until the roads thinned and the lights disappeared. But even as the landscape changed, one thing remained constant. Every time he checked the mirror, the back seat felt occupied. Some encounters don't end when the car stops. They don't fade with distance or time. Because the dead don't ask for rides by accident, and they don't forget the ones who help them finish the journey. If you ever see someone waiting alone on a quiet road, and they already know your name, keep driving, because some passengers were never meant to arrive. If this story stayed with you, you know what to do.